Hey everybody, it's Dave Soleil from the Sudbury School of Atlanta. Today we're talking about individualized education. Now, you may remember from past videos that we talked about traditional K-12 being like growing a field of sunflowers, where every flower looks exactly the same coming out on the other end, and that instead we wanted to cultivate a field of wildflowers, where we recognize that every student is unique and every flower blooms at a different time and it has a different color and a different size and a different shape. And we called that individualized education. And we're going to dive more into that today of what that looks like specifically and why do we choose that model. The first thing that I want to make clear, though, you'll hear a term bounced around a lot at traditional schools called differentiated learning. And what that is it's an organized yet flexible way of proactively adjusting teaching and learning methods to accommodate each child's learning needs and preferences. Now, this is good. This is a step toward individualized education, but let me give you a visual to describe a little bit more of what differentiated learning really is. If we want all of our students to look the same when they come out on the other end, it's kind of like an assembly line. And as a student, you are here, and maybe this assembly line doesn't work for you. And so instead we move you over to this assembly line that might be a little faster or a little slower or do things a little bit differently. But really the end goal is the same. I want to be clear today that differentiated learning is not what we are talking about. We are talking about individualized learning that goes far beyond this idea of differentiated learning within the traditional system. Remember, we're talking about shifting our paradigm to something completely different. And so I want to start with a quote from Dr. Herbert Simon. He was a Nobel Prize winner and is known as the father of cognitive science. And he really gives us some good insight into student learning. And here's what he says: learning results from what the student does and thinks, and only from what the student does and thinks. You'll notice he doesn't say learning results from what the teacher tells the student to do and to think. No, learning results from what the student does and thinks, and only from what the student does and thinks. Let me give you another quote from another visionary in education. His name is Dr. Sugata Mitra. He has an absolutely incredible TED Talk called The Child-Driven Education. He was the curator of the Hole in the Wall experiment that was really all about how children learn naturally without even having a teacher present. And here's what he says: if children have interest, then education happens. It's a natural process. He goes on to say, education is a self-organizing system where learning is an emergent phenomenon. A simpler way to say this is that people are naturally curious. Children are naturally curious, and if you give them the freedom to learn, they will find their best path to learning. Now, that becomes the root for what we are doing at the Sudbury School of Atlanta. We recognize that children are naturally curious. Now, in looking at these ideas of children having an interest in education happens, how do we cultivate that interest? And in a traditional K-12 setting, there's a false premise here, and the premise is that there's no learning without teaching. And we know that people learn all of the time in all different scenarios with and without teachers. So let's look at, can we look past this? We're going to set aside this idea that there's no learning without teaching, and let's dive into this idea of student interest. Remember, he said if children have interest, then education happens. So what cultivates that interest? Giving the students choice, giving them the freedom to choose, and trusting them, giving them respect for their choices. Now, for a lot of people and a lot of parents and a lot of teachers, this is a very radical shift from the traditional paradigms of education. And to be perfectly honest, this is the fork in the road. If you do not trust students and you do not trust their interests and their choices, you are going to tend toward the model of mass education, where all students are told what to think and how to think and what to do. If you trust students, you can cultivate a field of wildflowers where every student is unique and every student is different and they all learn different things. That is the essence of individualized education. So let's contrast these two very quickly. If we want a model of mass education, if we want all our students to turn out exactly the same, we're going to have a teacher-driven model where teachers tell students exactly what to do, and we're going to have students of all the same age together. They're going to have standardized content, standardized tests, and standardized assessments for homework and assignment and tests and grades because we want the end results standardized. Students will not be given choice, because if they're given choice, they're not going to turn into sunflowers. So we give them a rigid schedule, and we premise everything on the idea that there's no learning without teaching. It's an environment of competition, and the motivators for this are external. It's rewards and punishments, carrots and sticks. Now, if we want to shift our paradigm toward individualized education, we're going to have a student-driven rather than a teacher-driven environment where students are given freedom and choice. It's going to be multi-age because in maximizing learning, we know that all students learn from each other regardless of the age. So we don't want to shut that down. We want to cultivate that. We want to encourage that. We have helpful staff and individualized content that is based upon student choice for what students want to do and what they want to think. We don't have classes or assigned homeworks or quizzes or standardized tests because those are the things that fit students into a mold that creates all the same outcomes. We don't want the same outcomes. We want individualized outcomes. So we can have a flexible schedule, and we're premised on the idea that if you trust learners with freedom balanced with responsibility, that students will discover their best path to learning. This is the essence of individualized education. It's in a cooperative environment with intrinsic motivators. What are students interested in? What are they passionate about? What are they proud of that they do themselves? We're not answering to a teacher or to a legislator of what they think students should be interested in. We ask them and then we trust that. What does this look like on a day-to-day basis? Students can read and explore and play and experiment when they want, how they want, and for how long they want. They can take internships and apprenticeships, and they have unlimited access to the internet and libraries and the outdoors, and helpful staff are always available. This is the paradigm shift. This is what creates individualized education. So thank you for coming along with us on this journey of shifting your paradigm. We look forward to creating more videos to help you along in your paradigm shift at the Sudbury School of Atlanta.